Hi, my name is Hannah. I'm the Senior Outreach Officer at St Anne's College, and this is a very short video that gives a bit of an introduction to Oxbridge admissions tests, how they work, and how they're used as part of the Oxford application process. So first off, you must have registered for your admissions test for your course by the 15th of October, which is the same date and deadline as for sending off your application to Oxford or Cambridge. If you're not sure what admissions tests you need to sit, do have a look at the course page for your course and double check what is required for it. As for some joint honours courses, you might actually need to sit 2 admissions tests or part of one and part of another. So do double check what it is that you need to sit. The admissions tests themselves take place a couple of weeks after you've submitted your application to universities. And for this year, so in 2020, the BMAT, the CAT, so the Classics Admissions Test, the English Language Admissions Tests, Maths Admissions Test, Modern Languages and Oriental Languages and Philosophy tests are on the 4th of November, whereas other tests are on the 5th of November. So that includes tests like the TSA, the Thinking Skills Assessment. So do double check for this year which of your tests will be taking place on the 4th or the 5th of November for 2020. Some of those will also be taking place online. So for this year, the BMAT, so the Biomedical Sciences, and the TSA, so the Thinking Skills Assessment, are both online, and you would normally sit those through your own centre, your admissions testing centre, which is often your school. But do be aware as well that if you're having to self-isolate for any reason, you can apply through the admissions testing website, so that's the Cambridge admissions testing website. You can apply for remote proctoring, so basically sitting it in your own home if you know that you will be self-isolating or you'll be unable to attend your test centre for any reason. So you can have a look at those details online by going to the admissions testing website, which is run centrally for both Oxford and for Cambridge. So why do we use an admissions test? Because to be honest, it feels perhaps a little bit like another hurdle that you might have to jump over in order to complete your application for university. Well, there are a number of reasons why we use admissions tests, and they will often be weighted slightly differently depending on which subject you're applying for. So you can have a look online on the department website to find out how they use that admissions test as part of their shortlisting. But there are 5 general reasons why we ask you to sit an admissions test. One is that applicants can look very similar on their UCAS form, particularly if they've got, say, similar sets of GCSE grades, similar sets of predicted grades. They might come from similar backgrounds or have similar education experiences. So having an admissions test is a universal benchmark, so it's something that everyone has to sit, and it's then a good indication of how well you might perform on the course in the future. As you'll have seen from looking over admissions tests as well, they're a way of stretching and challenging applicants and finding out how they think, how they adapt their thinking to different material, and whether they can deal with new material that they might not have seen before. They're designed to assess your thinking and your comprehension skills, so that might be looking through critical questions and having to analyse and reach conclusions or find what the conclusion is or what the argument is in a paragraph. That might be looking at multiple choice questions and looking and working out what the most sensible answer is, or it might be planning, structuring and writing a well-argued essay, depending on what kind of test you're sitting. And where appropriate, we also assess subject knowledge and understanding. So that is particularly for a maths admissions test or a physics admissions test, but also the scientific portion of the BMAT as well. And they're a great way of helping to assess your academic potential. And by academic potential, we mean your ability to do well on a course at a place like Oxford or Cambridge. So how do we actually use admissions tests? Well, for any university application, you are providing your previous grades, so your GCSEs are equivalent, your predicted grades, so your A-levels are equivalent, a personal statement and a teacher reference. So we look at all of those things as well. But for Oxbridge, so for Oxford and Cambridge, you're also sitting perhaps an admissions test, or you might be providing some written work, a sample of your writing. We also use interviews, and we also look at contextual information as well. So your performance in the context of your school's performance. So for example, if you did very well at GCSE, but your school's average grade wasn't great, and actually you were one of the top students in your school, then that can count in your favour. We also look at things like free school meals, whether you've ever been in care, and whether you're from an area that doesn't have particularly high progression to higher education as well. So all of that information forms part of the picture of you and your application. So it's really important to point out that that admissions test is not counted in isolation. It's not a pass or fail test. There's often a band in the middle, and people grade in that area, and they will often be shortlisted for interview. But the pass mark, the average mark, can change year on year depending on how well people have done that year. And it could be anywhere from 40% to 70% depending on what kind of admissions test it is that you've sat. And you can still be shortlisted for an interview with a lower mark or a mark below that band, that middle band on your admissions test. And that can be based on some of that contextual information or your personal statement or your teacher reference. There are a few exceptions to that though, so do have a look perhaps on your department website if you want to find out more about how the admissions test is used for your specific subject. So for example, for medicine, they look specifically at your contextual GCSE score and your BMAT score as well, and look at those together to see how well you have performed on that test and how well you have performed in the past. However, as I said, that is not taken in isolation. That's still taken in the context of you, how you've performed in your school compared to how other people have performed in your school. So it is not just a pass-fail admissions test. There's a lot more to it than that. So my advice really is don't panic too much about that admissions test. You can obviously look up the data. You can find out what those pass marks are, what those average marks are, but it is not a hard and fast pass or fail test. You can be shortlisted even if you have below that average. Some people are even not shortlisted even if they have above that average based on the rest of the information that they provide. So even if you're thinking, I don't think I'm going to do very well on my admissions test, that doesn't mean that it's all over, because there's still lots of other things in your application that we look at as well. It's really important to think about how you prepare for your admissions test as well, as different tests can require different ways of preparation. So for example, for the biomedical, maths and physics admissions tests, we would really recommend that you treat them like an exam and that you put the time and the revision in to prepare for them. There are specifications for each of these papers online that you can find. Have a look over those. Some of that might include GCSE material, some of that might be A-level material that you've already covered or you're going to cover in the next few months, but there's a long list of everything that could come up in those papers. So use that basically as your revision plan. Make sure you're comfortable with that material because anything from that could come up. Particularly if you're doing the BMAT and you're not studying maths at A-level, do make sure you go over your notes from Maths GCSE, make sure you're really clear on what that material is. Or if you study double science at GCSE, do make sure you have a look over that material because there will be things included in triple science GCSE that aren't included in double science. So make sure you have a look at those specifications. You can also have a look over past papers, treat them like past exams, have a go at them, and revise and prepare appropriately. However, for other admissions tests, so for English, modern languages, history, Oriental studies and classics, a different technique might be helpful for you, which is why we say similar exercises might be helpful. So that might be some of the things that you are doing in class at the moment. So for example, in history, the admissions test is a source-based question, and you might be looking at source material in your lessons at the moment. Or if you're not very familiar with that, you might want to remind yourself, have a look through different textbooks, have a look through source material and get used to dealing with very different information to what you might be having a look at in your A-level content. So that's why we say similar exercises. Same for the English admissions test. Do your practice papers, do your past papers, but reading widely, reading broadly is very good advice for how to deal with those kinds of tests. And then for tests like the Thinking Skills Assessment and the LNAT, so then Law Aptitude Test, do have a look at those past papers. Treat it as a bank of past papers because it might be very different to what you're used to doing in class. It might be very different to how you structure your essays in class. So put in the practice to prepare appropriately for those exams. Look over those past papers, get really familiar with what could come up, how long you have to do each section, how long you have to answer each question. Make sure you're really precise on what your timings are and what you can expect for them. So those specimen and past papers are available for all of those tests online, and you can familiarise yourself with the content, the level and the format so that nothing's a surprise on the day. Especially get to know the different types of questions that you could get asked, so the to what extent or the how far, so that again it doesn't surprise you, but make sure when you get that paper you read the question carefully, you underline perhaps key words if you're writing an essay, you make sure that you have understood what the question is and what they're asking you. Do test yourself under timed conditions. This is really helpful for any of those tests because often there'll be lots of questions coming up that you might not have the time to answer all of them, but get used to going through them as quickly as you can. And there are mark schemes for a lot of those papers online, so do review the answers, but make sure you've given it a good go before you have a look at the answer papers, as you want to work out why that answer is the correct answer or the recommended answer. Apart from the multiple choice questions, often there will be recommended answers or ways that candidates could answer a question. There's not always a hard and fast answer for those essay-based questions. It's about how you present your argument. And all of those can be found online, so on the Oxford website, the Cambridge website, and also the Central Admissions Testing website as well. So finally, my top tips for you. Make sure you know what the test looks like, how long you have, what the different sections are, what kind of things can come up in those sections, how it's marked, which questions score you more points than other questions, as they might be ones you want to focus on. Make sure you practice under timed conditions and that you know how much time you have for each of those sections and each of those questions. If you get stuck on something, perhaps you could skip that question and come back to it later if you have time. There isn't a negative marking. There is no negative marking for many of the papers as well, so actually it can be worth just making a guess and moving on and coming back to it if you need to. You can use the question paper for your workings except for the maths and for the PAT, and some exam centres might give you a piece of scrap paper to work on as well, so do draw out those lateral thinking questions, try different ways of answering them as well. If you're not sure of an answer, eliminate the options that are clearly wrong. Often you can whittle it down to maybe 2 choices and then guess sensibly if necessary, because there isn't negative marking, so make a good sensible guess and move on if you need to. Perhaps you might be able to find a teacher or a friend who might be able to give you some feedback on a mock paper. Do remember that even if there isn't a specialist teacher in your school, you might be able to give a mock paper to an English teacher if it's an essay-based question, or to a history teacher if it's a source-based question, or a maths teacher if it's maths questions. So you might be able to find a different teacher depending on which paper or which portion of the paper you're looking at as well. And above all, don't give up. They are hard questions. They are probably things that you've not thought of before or not looked at before, but that doesn't mean that you can't do it. Do put in the time, do treat it like an exam, and even if you feel as though it's not going well, keep going, because it will certainly go better if you have a go at those questions rather than if you completely shut down. So don't give up, give it a good go and do your best. There are lots of great online resources that you can use as well. So there are videos and webinars. For example, there's one on the history admissions test, and there are some for the thinking skills assessment. The maths department at Oxford's been running weekly sessions for the maths admissions test. These are live on Thursdays, and then you get like the Cliff Notes version of it on a Saturday. There are really good resources on the medicine website and particularly the BMAT website as well. So do check those out. You can access all of those medicine resources for free, so there's no reason to sign up to one of the subscription services. A lot of the same resources and good resources are free as well. The Oxford and Cambridge past papers for most of those tests are available online, And you might actually find it helpful if you are doing, for example, the BMAT. You might find looking at some of the thinking skills assessment questions quite helpful. Similar multiple choice questions. You might also find it helpful to have a look at the American SAT and ACT papers as well, because there's often an essay portion and multiple choice sections of those as well. However, do focus on your own test. Do remember what it is that's different about your test so that you're not thinking about some other one. But if you're running out of resources, you might find some of those quite helpful as well. Don't forget that Oxford also offers a fantastic website called Oxplore. So if you are looking for essay style questions where they're those really broad questions where you have to weigh up different sides of an argument, do have a look at the Oxplore website, because they will present lots of different questions on there that you can then take an approach to that fits in with your specific admissions test. And if you would like to speak to a student who has gone through that whole process themselves, who's got through their admissions test, then feel free to use the chat function on our St Anne's College website. And that's a great way of getting in contact with some of our current students who have had to go through the same process, and they might be able to give you some advice or answer your questions if you have any about the admissions process. Thanks very much for listening, and if you do have any further questions, you are welcome to get in contact with the outreach email address for St Anne's College. That will come through to me. Look forward to hearing from you, and good luck with your admissions test. Above all, focus on yourself. Don't worry about what other people are doing. Don't worry about past scores or what the average was for last year or anything like that. Just focus on doing the best that you can and put that work in. Treat it like an exam. Put some revision in, get used to what the style of questions are, and good luck.